A lot of the criticism that I hear of about evolutionary biology and also evolutionary psychology is something, I think maybe Stephen Gould coined the term, which is just so stories. That this idea that you're sort of concocting a story that matches the current data or the current use of a particular feature. What do you think about that? Is that something that can happen, or is it a risk in doing that kind of work?
I'd say that there's a lot of that has historically gone on and still goes on by folks in their conclusion or the discussion at the end. It's not an evolutionary paper per se, but they just, in the middle of the discussion, they'll start throwing out some stories, and sometimes those stories stick, and it's just what people say. There was never any real study for it.
Yeah.
So, but there's a class of evolutionary biologists who have always focused on trying to understand the animal in the context of its environment, the ethologists, who are really trying to pose design-related functions. So why is it that the underside of the fish is lighter than the top of the fish?
Right.
What is it called? It's whatever, the counter shading.
And
then testing, well, is that the optimal? Yeah, actually, that's exactly what you'd want, because when you're underneath it, then it blends in with the sky. And in fact, can you test to see, well, those that are counter shades, and then you go and you paint it the opposite, are they a little more likely to get eaten? That's then a behavioral kind of test. And then they can go show the animals that are deep dwelling, because they're never going to be seen from below. Are they as likely to be counter shaded? They do all those three classes of tests all the time.
Sure.
And no one complains. Well, some people probably complain about those areas too, but it's more as you start to approach brain, as soon as you start to especially approach anything human, then suddenly there's a whole different standard, and that happens, and sort of no, you can't study that anymore, and you can't test it. You can't even pose rigorous testable hypotheses. Like, no, people have been doing that for 100 years.
Yeah.
And it's actually counterproductive, because again, you cannot understand the mechanisms for anything without understanding the designs that they're, and this also then comes, you actually look like you almost were doing it before. You were afraid to say design, or you were afraid to say something teleological, suggesting purpose.
Yes.
And I think that's a crazy thing too. People have gotten to the idea that you can't say purpose-related things, but that's the genius of natural selection, is that natural selection really designed things. It's not that there was no design, it's just that there was no designer. That's what's so beautiful. You get design without a designer.
Yeah. Right.
Not that you don't get any design at all and there's no designer. No, look, there's design.
Yes.
The eye is for seeing, and if you've painted yourself in philosophically so that you can't even say that the eye is teleologically loaded for seeing, then you've got to start talking in weird circles that are just equivalent to that anyway. And ultimately, we know you're just trying to say for, and it's ridiculous,
Yeah, I think people get nervous about the intelligent design, using the word design, because then that could be construed as, intelligent design, meaning that there's a designer, right? And so I think, having been in sort of science communication circles, I've sort of been taught or trained or somehow that I shouldn't use the term design, but I get the idea. I mean, it can have sort of a localized design factor without there being some prime cause behind it. I mean, that makes sense to me.
Well, and I would still say there's a cause, and this is also the weird thing about evolution, because the mechanism that evolution leads to a mechanism that computes or instantiates the design.
Yeah.
But the mechanism of evolution that brought about that mechanism that does that design, and it is a mechanism, the mechanism of evolution, right?
Sure.
But it's a weird mechanism.
Yeah.
It's like more like doing evolution, genetic algorithm, something like that as your mechanism.
Right.
Involving real animals killing each other and eating each other and differentially surviving for hundreds of millions of years. And it's just that's the mechanism, right? This really slow, arduous, painful, awful, mechanism.
Yeah.
And so that's not a pretty mechanism. It's not a mechanism that you can. I mean, people study like the details of the evolutionary mechanism itself. How do genes, in fact, do what they do from generation, all that kind of stuff. But that's the cause, right? In that case, those are the causes for how we got those mechanisms that instantiate designs. That's how the design happened.
Yeah. I mean, it's and it's organisms trying to fit their environment to be the most successful reproductively, essentially. I mean, they're so if the environmental factors change, then the design of the animal essentially changes. I mean, it's sort of a fit rather than a sort of a top-down design in the way that we would think of designing a chair or designing a
right. And even in the case of cultural evolution or design, much of what we think of as design done by really smart humans is really a lot more evolutionary, like cultural evolution.
Yeah.
A lot of the times the people are designing something, but it's really on the backs of all of these thousands. It's all of these millions in a long history of designers which keep tweaking and tweaking and tweaking, and none of them understand the optimal chair per se.
Yeah.
They couldn't have derived from first principles of the optimal human chair, but over time, thousands of these, and the market demands of people buying some and not buying the others, slowly but surely we find these sort of sweet spots of human chairs and seats and so forth.